Today we're out here with the 2019 Honda HR-V, the smallest crossover in Honda's lineup in America. After 4 years on sale, they've decided to give this a mild refresh for 2019. We have some new safety features available. We have a new front end look. They've deleted the manual transmission. We have some tweaks to the interior. And most importantly, we have a whole host of new and refreshed competition. The subcompact crossover segment is one of the hottest and fastest growing segments in America, so let's see where the Honda HR-V fits in. 2019 brings a slight tweak to the front end design. Since we're driving the Touring model, we have these full LED headlamps up front. These are very similar to what we see in top end trims of the Honda Civic. It fits really in line with the rest of Honda's lineup in America, but these are not standard. You will only find them in the top end trims. Every other model gets halogen headlamps. For 2019, there's also a new sport trim that gets some front end treatments very similar to what we see in the Honda Fit Sport. At 170.4 inches long, the HR-V is either towards the top end or the middle of the subcompact crossover segment, depending on exactly what you want to include as competition to this model. This is 5 inches shorter than the Subaru Crosstrek, but the Crosstrek is sort of not a direct competitor to this. The Crosstrek was based on the Impreza hatchback and Impreza sedan. It really is just a lifted Impreza hatchback, and that fits into the compact category. The Honda Civic would be the most direct competitor to that one. But for a variety of different reasons, Subaru decided to price that model more like the HR-V than the Honda Civic. This is a full 9 inches longer than the Ford EcoSport. The size difference is really noticeable once you get on the inside, as we'll talk about in a bit, because this is based on the Honda Fit, and it borrows a lot of those cargo and passenger room practicalities that we see in that small Honda model. Out back, things are pretty similar to the outgoing model. We have tail lamp modules that are basically the same shape, partial LED modules in the trim that we're looking at right here, so the brake lights are LEDs, but the turn signals are still incandescent bulbs. When it comes to active safety, Honda's doing things a little bit differently than we see at Toyota. The active safety package called Honda Sensing, which is their all-encompassing system, is not found on the LX or Sport trims. You'll only find it on EX, EXL, and the Touring trim that we're driving right here. That includes all of their latest safety systems: adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assistance, autonomous braking, road departure mitigation, etc. Personally, I think it's a little bit of a pity that we don't see some of those systems driven down to the base model, especially that autonomous braking package, because some of the competition to the HR-V now comes with autonomous braking standard. Under the hood, we still find the same 1.8-liter four-cylinder engine as before. It produces 141 horsepower and 127 pound-feet of torque. For 2019, the manual transmission is gone. The only option now is the continuously variable automatic, which we have on this model. Power levels are definitely below some of the newer competition. For instance, we now have a turbocharged Kona and a turbocharged Soul. But the HR-V still delivers excellent fuel economy, and that's what the CVT is all about here. Fuel economy ranges between 28 and 30 miles per gallon, and there really isn't much of a penalty if you choose the all-wheel drive option. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to still give the HR-V 9 out of 10 points. I find these seats generally comfortable, but we don't have any adjustable lumbar support, and I really would like to have seen at least a manual two-way lumbar support, especially in this top-end trim. For my body shape, I do find the seats in the brand new Nissan Kicks a little bit more comfortable than what we find in the HR-V, as well as something like top-end trims of the Kia Soul, which is sort of a competitor to this model. We still have a tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty good range of motion, and the passenger seat is a manual seat even in this top-end trim. Hopping into the back seat, you'll really find the claim to fame for the HR-V, and that is the incredible amount of interior room we find in here. 80.5 inches of legroom, that's front row plus second row combined, actually means that we have more combined legroom in this than in something like a Toyota RAV4, which is theoretically one step larger than this. You'll find a full 4 inches more combined legroom in this than a Mazda CX-3, a Chevy Trax, a Hyundai Kona, or the Nissan Kicks. And it's really obvious if I sit behind myself. The front seat's adjusted for me very comfortably. I still have about 4 inches of legroom left or so. And even if I move all the way over to the right side where this front seat is all the way back in its tracks, I still have about an inch left. Even though this is related to the Honda Fit, the overall ceiling shape is definitely squarer. Now, we are driving the model with the optional sunroof, so the ceiling does bump up a little bit there, and if I lean forward, my head will actually touch the ceiling. But sitting back here in place, my head still has about half an inch of headroom left, and the ceiling is square, which means I'm less likely to bop my head on the side of the ceiling. Now, these seats, in kind of an interesting touch, have a two-way recline mechanism, so you can actually put them in two different positions. The seat back moves overall about 3/4 of an inch. Like the Honda Fit, the rear seats move in a variety of different ways. Honda calls this the magic seat design. We can put that up in that position, and then I can put the other seat up in a similar position, and then we have this large rectangular area behind the front seats where you can put larger items. We can then lower that seat, and then of course fold the rear seats down in the traditional fashion, right like that, and they actually go quite far into the floor because of the way that mechanism works. That means these seat backs are pretty level with the cargo area in the back. Honda's really done an excellent job at engineering these seats to be very, very practical. One thing I dislike, however, is that when these rear headrests are completely down and then you pop them back up, they do leave a pretty big imprint right there on the seat back, and it's very noticeable if you get the leather upholstery. In addition to those very practical rear seats, we also find a great deal of cargo capacity behind this hatch, 24.3 cubic feet. That puts this just a hair below the Nissan Kicks, but in terms of overall practicality, the HR-V definitely wins here, because those rear seats fold flatter and further into the floor than we find in the Kicks, meaning it's a lot easier to put large items from the cargo area right on in there over the back seats. We also find a spare tire under this cargo area load floor and just a small amount of additional storage space. Other than the Nissan Kicks, the only other small crossover in America that can come close to this cargo capacity is the all-new Kia Soul, but it's not available with all-wheel drive, and when you fold down its rear seats, very much like the Nissan, it's not going to be as practical as the HR-V. You'll find twice the cargo space back here that you'll find in a Mazda CX-3 and 25% more than a Subaru Crosstrek. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end touring trim, so there are a few things in here that we won't see in the base model. This is a pretty standard-sized moonroof. It just goes over to the driver and front passengers' heads. But if we look towards the rear, remember what I said earlier about the way that ceiling is shaped. It definitely still has a pretty big indent right there from that moonroof, just in front of the rear passengers' heads. You'll also notice from this angle that that center seat belt out back does come from the side, and that does cause a child seat in the middle to be skewed off to the side. The driver and front passenger have height adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests. The model that we're driving does have leather upholstery. The seats are perforated right there in the center sections, although these seats are not ventilated, they are just heated. One of the things that I've always liked about the HR-V, and that continues for 2019, is that the interior materials quality is definitely higher than the average in the subcompact segment. And that surprised me when the HR-V first landed, because in terms of overall parts quality, the HR-V has always seemed to be just a little bit above the Honda Fit, with which this is definitely closely related. Over here on the door panels on our model, we have some stitched components right there. These are not leather, they are imitation leather, but they're soft touch materials, and then we have a soft touch armrest. But if you move down to the lower end trims of the HR-V, they don't replace these upper panels with hard plastics. Instead, they actually swap them out for fabric parts, which I think really is a nice touch. Definitely has a more premium feel than a lot of those other options out there. If we move over to the dashboard, we have sort of an Audi 5000 theme going on here with these 3 air vents running right there across the passenger side. We do find hard plastics at the top of the dashboard just as you'd expect, but the center section is a soft touch plastic. The infotainment system has been updated versus the original launch of the HR-V, so we now have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support in this system. Touch buttons over here for home, menu, and then a back button, physical volume, and power knob right here. And then this particular model offers factory navigation. To the left of that, there's one air vent over there for the driver. And then if we move down from there, our model has the optional single zone automatic climate control system. Manual climate control is what you'll find in the base model. The engine start stop button is right over here to the left of that. We then have a pretty typical console shifter down here. Drive is back there. Sport mode is 1 notch back. Behind the shifter, we have an electric parking brake and an auto brake hold button. This is a feature that I really appreciate and one that is very, very rare in vehicles this inexpensive. If we move back from there, we find the 2 cup holders up front. They have kind of interesting ways of motion. They have these little arms that will lock into place right there, and then bottoms that will push in to make the cup holder deeper, and they operate independently from one another. So we press a little button right here on the side, and those things flip out, and that bottom comes up, but then you can adjust them independently of one another. For instance, if you want that arm out, but you want that deep for some of those taller cans like LaCroix cans, you can definitely do that right there. The center armrest slides forward and covers one of those cup holders, or it moves back and then lifts out of the way to give access to a fairly small storage cubby. Keep in mind this is a pretty small car. Moving over to the instrument cluster, we get 3 different kinds of readouts. There's an LED digital display over here on the left side. This is the tachometer and, of course, the transmission mode indication. We then have a pretty typical analog speedometer right here. There's actually a physical needle that rotates around right there. And you'll notice that we have a white ring around it. That ring changes to green if it thinks that you're driving in an efficient manner. And then over here on the right side, we have an actual color LCD. The color LCD is where we find things like our typical trip computer readouts, the status of the vehicle's active safety systems, certain vehicle settings, and the status of the vehicle's all-wheel drive system if you have that particular option. A nice touch for an inexpensive vehicle is that we can actually adjust the color of this fuel efficiency ring. So you can actually choose from all these various different colors right there within the system: white, blue, violet, pink, red, etc. The steering wheel is a round 3-spoke design. There aren't really any sport grips up top. Depending on the trim you're looking at, we do have paddle shifters on the steering wheel, down on the left and up on the right, although personally I think they're about as useful as paddle shifters on a Poodle when we're talking about a car with a continuously variable transmission. Over here on the right side, we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system, a lane keeping button right there. This toggle that's just a bit behind the steering wheel controls that multifunction LCD on the right side of the speedometer, up, down, and then a select button. On the left side, we have a nearly identical button bank. This houses the voice command button and then dedicated phone hang-up and pickup buttons. There's also a back button there. And then these two buttons actually refer to the infotainment system. So this button right up here changes between the various different screen layouts in the infotainment system. If I zoom out, you can see how that works right there. Toggles along between those options. And then this bottom option right here takes us over to the mapping interface and then allows us to interact with a few different screens there. Unfortunately, one of the first things you'll notice about the HR-V out on the road is the overall acceleration, because at 9.5 seconds 0 to 60 tested in this all-wheel drive model, this is one of the slowest entries available. If you want to go slower than this, you could get something like a Ford EcoSport at over 10 seconds 0 to 60, but most of the mainstream competition that this will compete with are actually going to be a little bit faster, even with their base engines. The Mazda CX-3, the Hyundai Kona, the Kia Soul, etc., they're all going to be faster 0 to 60 than this model, and a lot of the entries offer turbocharged engines like the Chevy Trax, the Buick Encore, the Kia Soul again, and of course that Hyundai Kona again, and those will be notably quicker than the model that we're driving right here. Adding the optional all-wheel drive system also makes the HR-V feel a little bit more sluggish and a little bit heavier. It's also worth noting that adding the all-wheel drive system may improve overall traction, but it actually has a detrimental effect on the overall 0 to 60 score. In our braking test, this model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 115 feet, which is a very good score for this segment, and you can thank the overall light curb weight for that stopping score. The model that we're driving is the heaviest version of the HR-V, and this weighs right around 3,000 pounds. So this is one of the lightest entries, even though this is also one of the largest. That light curb weight plays directly into the overall handling ability of the HR-V. I'm going to give this an A- when it comes to overall handling. This doesn't grip the road quite as well as some of the competition, like the brand new turbocharged Kona, but if we're talking about base or mid-level trims, the HR-V handles very well thanks to its overall lower curb weight. Even though the HR-V handles well, the engine just sucks some of the fun out of the handling. The CVT does its best to wring as most out of the engine as absolutely possible, but with just over 140 horsepower, this is just not going to be as swift off the line or in the corners as the competition. Overall, I think Honda struck a pretty good balance between overall ride and handling in this vehicle. As I've said before, they're often two ends of the teeter-totter, because if you make a suspension too soft, it's going to affect the overall handling ability, but if it's too firm, it's going to affect the overall ride. Even though we are driving the model with the largest wheels available, this still does a reasonably good job of soaking up some of those road imperfections. One of the reasons that we're able to get a reasonable compliant ride in the HR-V and still have good handling is that the HR-V again is fairly light compared to a lot of the competition. By removing weight from the vehicle, they can make the suspension a little bit softer and still reach their handling goals. In our cabin noise test, I'm going to give this a B. We got 72 decibels in this cabin at 50 miles an hour, which is fairly average for this particular segment. There's some quieter entries, but there are definitely going to be some louder ones as well. Thanks to the light curb weight, fuel economy is excellent in the HR-V. We've been averaging over 32 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving, and that is notably above the EPA average for this car. That's something that we also noted back when we tested the 2016 model, and of course the related Honda Fit as well. Honda really has been doing an excellent job at beating those EPA scores in real-world driving for a lot of their base models. Overall fuel economy is one of the reasons that we don't see the manual transmission available in the HR-V anymore, because the CVT simply gives us better fuel economy. In terms of overall fuel economy scores, that definitely puts this among the best in this segment, and if you want anything better, you're going to have to look for a hybrid. But on balance, remember that we don't get as much power out of this engine as we do find in a lot of the competition. The best way to describe the HR-V is that this is just a very easy to live with vehicle. The seats are relatively comfortable, the interior is, I think, a nicer place to spend your time than the Honda Fit, one of the big reasons that you might want to upgrade from the Fit into the HR-V. And even though it's not the quickest in this bunch, it handles well and it gives us excellent fuel economy. It's just an all-around very easy to live with crossover. If you didn't know it, it actually takes more than just me to make an Alex and Autos video happen, and our videographer and video editor actually happens to own a Honda HR-V. Let's talk about the things that she likes and dislikes about her car. The first like that she has is the fuel economy, which actually is excellent, as we've noted in this video and in previous videos of the HR-V. That's one of the things it does really, really well. On the downside, overall performance does fall below some of the newer entries because this is definitely favoring fuel economy. Her other big like is something that we've also noted here before, and that's the absolute practicality we find on the inside. We have an incredible amount of room. She said that her HR-V feels an awful lot bigger than it is, but it's still easy to park, and that's definitely something that we see when it comes to the numbers. The overall legroom in here, the overall cargo room in the back, and the way that those seats move and fold. When it comes to things that Honda could improve on, she said that she really felt that the rear seats could be a little bit more comfortable, and she also thought that the cabin could be a little bit quieter out on the road. For 2019, you need to know a few things about the HR-V. The first thing is that there is no manual transmission, so things start out only with the continuously variable transmission. The other thing you need to know is that Honda Sensing is not standard. CarPlay and Android Auto are also not standard. If you want the smartphone connectivity features, you have to work your way on one trim level up into the Sport trim, and then if you want Honda Sensing, which is their all-encompassing active safety package that we had on our model, then you have to go one step up from that. That gets you to $23,720 for a front-wheel drive EX trim of the HR-V with all those safety features. It's important to keep that in mind when you compare the HR-V to something like a Toyota CHR because it does have all of those active safety features standard even in the base model. The CHR also has a continuously variable transmission, and overall performance is not far off of the HR-V. The big thing with the CHR is that all-wheel drive is simply not an option. You either get a front-wheel drive one or you get a front-wheel drive one. The other thing to know about the CHR is that due to the overall style of the vehicle, interior room is not as generous as we find on the Honda. And that's really obvious when we take a look at the combined legroom figures. You have about 5 inches less overall legroom in the CHR than the HR-V, and we have notably less cargo room as well. On the other hand, the CHR is a pretty good deal in its base trim because again we get those active safety features and overall feature content for the dollar is pretty good. The downside is that you won't find all of the same kind of top-end features available in the CHR that we do find in the Honda. Next up we have the Jeep Compass, which surprised me and I think everybody out there by suddenly becoming the best-selling entry in this segment. I am of course talking about the brand new Compass, not the rather unfortunate looking one that was launched a number of years ago. You can think of this Compass as the more typical crossover-shaped version of the Jeep Renegade because the two vehicles do share a little bit under the structure. The Compass starts right about the same range as the HR-V at $21,845, but it will go on up to be quite a bit more expensive than the HR-V at up to about $34,000. That's mainly because we see options available in the Compass that we don't see available in the Honda or indeed in most of the entries in this segment. The Compass is also arguably one of the most capable entries in this segment from an all-wheel drive perspective. So if you're looking for a vehicle that can go a little bit further off the beaten path, the Compass is going to beat something along the lines of the Crosstrek due to the overall all-wheel drive system design. It's also worth noting that the Compass can have considerably more ground clearance than we find in the HR-V, the CHR, the Kia Soul, the Trax, etc. You can get well over 8 inches of ground clearance in that model, depending on which options you select. But you will end up paying for that, and of course, it's going to be a little bit heavier as well. Depending on how you configure the Compass, it could be up to 500 pounds heavier than an HR-V. And remember that weight is the enemy of acceleration, braking, and overall handling ability. So even though we get about 40 more horsepower out of the engine in the Compass, it's not necessarily going to be faster than the Honda. Next up, we have the other Go Anywhere entry in this segment, the Subaru Crosstrek. The important thing to remember about the Crosstrek, of course, is that it's not really the same thing. Generally speaking, we have a slightly more premium interior than the average subcompact crossover, especially some of the older subcompacts in America, but the overall seating position and the overall interior definitely is compact hatchback, not subcompact crossovers. The seating position is a little bit more reclined, the cargo area is not quite as square, not quite as practical. But on the other hand, Subaru has definitely lifted the Crosstrek high off the ground, so overall ground clearance and off-road ability are definitely very good. If you're specifically looking for something small and easy to park, the Crosstrek is going to be a little bit tricky, because it's about 6 inches longer than the HRV, and the HRV is already on the long side for this particular segment. You should also know that although all-wheel drive is standard, so is a manual transmission. So if you want an automatic transmission, keep that in mind when you're taking a look at the overall pricing structure. Of course, on the other hand, if you're looking for a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid, there is one available in the Crosstrek, but we don't find one in the HRV. With that out of the way, let's take a look at one of the trickiest, but one of the more interesting options in this segment, which is the Kia Soul. Very much like the CHR, the Soul is a front-wheel drive vehicle, and Kia doesn't necessarily call it a crossover. It really is more honestly a boxy subcompact hatchback. The reason the Soul is on this list is because it's very practical, and I think it compares very well in terms of overall interior dimensions to the HRV. It really is the only other entry here that can actually compete with the HRV when it comes to overall legroom, overall cargo capacity, overall interior practicality generally. It also has a very low starting price, under $18,000 for the base model. Now, admittedly, that base model is pretty basic. It does have a manual transmission, but the price tag is so much lower than the HRV that by the time you've added all those features onto the Soul, it'll end up being either very similarly priced or actually less expensive. And that is one of the big deals here, because for the price of the Touring model that we were driving this week, you could actually get a turbocharged version of the Soul that would be significantly faster, 0 to 60. We're talking several seconds. Overall fuel economy will of course drop if you select the turbocharged engine, but it won't drop quite as far as some of the other alternatives in this segment. It'll drop right down to around 28 or 29 miles per gallon in overall real-world driving. Kia does not make their complete suite of active safety systems standard on the Soul, but around the $20,000 mark you will find the basics, including autonomous emergency braking, which is the key feature here. By the time you've worked your way on up to the top-end trim, you will get features like adaptive cruise control that we do find on those lower-end trims of the HRV, but you'll also find a number of other features that we don't, like a larger infotainment system, and of course a heads-up display, something that we don't find at all on the HRV. My bottom line for this segment is that if you don't need all-wheel drive, then I would definitely put the Kia Soul at the top of the list in this segment. The 2020 redesign of the Soul has definitely improved the overall fuel economy and the overall refinement, but it hasn't really lost any of the practicality that we've always loved about the Soul. If anything, it's actually improved it because the cargo area got a little bit bigger in this generation. If you want an electric Soul, there will also be one coming up soon. So we have those 3 different flavors, the one with the CVT, the turbocharged one, and then the electric option. But none of those will have all-wheel drive. So if all-wheel drive is what you're looking for, I would actually say it's probably going to be a tie between the HRV and the Jeep Compass. The Jeep excels when it comes to off-road ability, overall styling, and practicality as well. It's just about as practical and just about as roomy as the Honda, whereas the Honda really excels when it comes to overall fuel economy and, of course, reliability. So if those are key things that are important to you, put the Honda HRV on your shopping list, just a little bit above the Compass. Be sure to let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. If you haven't already done so, be sure to hit that subscribe button down there as well so you can be updated on all of our latest videos. If you want to support this channel, and I hope you do, click up there to the top of your screen. You'll be taken over to patreon.com where you can make a monthly pledge. I'll see you later.